Welcome to Policy on Demand. I'm Sindhu Blume.
And I'm Scott McCandless. It is the week of July 14th, and this is your Monday briefing. Congress has wrapped up its work on budget reconciliation and is now turning to appropriations for fiscal year 2026, with the current fiscal year ending on September 30th.
We're going to focus today on tariffs and trade, but first, I want to get an update on appropriations and what's happening with that, what it means for tax policy, and what the impact will be on rescissions.
Sure, great question. So the appropriations process typically involves about a dozen bills that are supposed to make their way through both the House and the Senate. And the House and Senate are engaged in that process right now, with several bills already moving, several committees taking up their subject matter of jurisdiction and processing it. The idea, though, that all 12 reconciliation bills can get through both the House and the Senate before September 30th might be a tad ambitious. So it's conceivable that we might end up in a situation with a continuing resolution, or CR, which is just an extension of current policy. There might be some tweaks to it, but essentially it'll just keep the doors of government open. And it could be short term, maybe through the end of the calendar year. It could be longer, maybe through next year, through all of 2026. We'll have to see. The trick, though, is that unlike budget reconciliation, this deal will require 60 votes in the Senate, and therefore there is some compromise that will have to occur between Republicans and Democrats. You mentioned the word rescission, and that's a very specific process that hasn't often been used, but has come up recently. And the House actually passed a rescissions package a little while ago that now the Senate this week will try to address. And in fact, because of the way the mechanics of it operate, it has to be dealt with before the end of this week, or its clock will run out. Rescissions package is a way to undo previously appropriated funds. So you can do that in a future appropriation, or you can just say, we don't like what we spent money on these particular issues. We're going to take that back. Congress can do that if they wish. It's through this rescissions process, which again, the House had already completed. Now the Senate is trying to take up that work. And it's kind of a fascinating issue, not just rescission, but this overall appropriations bill, because we're operating with some interesting news that just came out since last week, that in June, we actually ran a small budget surplus. Surplus is not a word you hear often in Washington, D.C. We're often talking about deficits. It was about $27 billion, so not enough to truly change the trajectory of our multi-trillion-dollar debt,
Right.
But it was very interesting, first time in almost a decade that we'd seen a monthly budget surplus occur, and it was largely related to trade and tariffs, which is, I think, something we'll be talking about next. So it's an interesting dynamic within the appropriations process right now.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for that. Sure. Really appreciate it. And now let's turn to tariffs and trade. The Trump administration has refocused on trade, sending letters to different countries and setting a new deadline for trade deals by August 1st, or face higher tariffs.
To provide some perspective on these developments, we've brought in Chris Desmond, a principal in PwC's Customs and International Trade Practice. Chris, welcome.
Good to see you both.
Thanks for being with us. Chris, let's start with this idea about the constant flux of tariffs. There's a new deadline of August 1st, as Sindhu mentioned, for trade deals before new and higher tariffs come into play. And there might also be some sector-specific tariffs, pharma, copper, among those things being mentioned. Can you give us the lay of the land and where things stand at this moment?
It's been a busy week and a busy time. A lot's happened in the last 3.5 months since the April 2nd Liberation Day tariffs announced. We expected to have a lot more agreements by now, Scott, to be honest with you, but right now we do have the UK agreement signed. We have a trade framework agreement for China and a preliminary agreement with Vietnam. Not quite what the administration was anticipating, but they were really focused before July 4th on the one big beautiful bill that now has been executed. That does actually help out a little bit from the trade perspective, because it actually allows us to know what are the potential opportunities and incentives surrounding U.S. tax planning on trade. But now we got to switch our attention back to the actual tariffs. And so post July 4th, it's going to be tariff time again. And since that time, we've had over 20 letters go out to different countries, including Canada, Japan, Brazil. And these rates have fluctuated from the original April 2nd Liberation Day tariffs, ranging from 20 to 50%, 50. And some of these rates are even higher than what were originally on the April 2nd Liberation Day. Some of the interesting things we see about this is that there are some agreements, like we're thinking about our friends to the north and the south. You know, we have Canada is 5% higher than Mexico, which kind of signals to at least me as a trade practitioner, there might be some separation from a USMCA perspective, and we might be looking to have agreements specifically with Canada versus Mexico. Then, of course, that news wasn't enough for last week. We had the sector tariffs that you mentioned for copper at 50%. Pharmaceuticals rumored to be upwards of 200% over 12 months. That's not the news that most pharmaceutical companies were anticipating. That number is gigantic, quite honestly, but it's not as if it's going to be a switch turn on overnight. It's going to be over time. We don't have guidance on when that may come out, but we just have what the number is. Speaking of numbers, I think that piece that you brought in about the trade surplus is really interesting, and it kind of parlays into an insight that we released last Friday dealing with the trade impact of these rates I just mentioned. So right now in the insight, we've taken the 2024 trade data, and roughly speaking, about 76 billion of US imports were tariffed in that period of time. That may increase to upwards of 900 billion using the data of the current rates that may go into effect on August 1st. So that surplus may not be an anomaly. It might be something we see again in the future.
All right. And I want to just mention that that insight is going to be linked in the description of this episode. So, Chris, the United States is initiating these trade deals by letter, as you mentioned. So do you have a sense of how the back and forth will commence, and will there be a back and forth?
It's so it's like buying a house. I feel like these are like contracts that are being sent from the buyer to the seller, just saying, "Hey, can we do this agreement? Can we do this agreement?" But there's no agreement that's been made for the actual contract. So these letters are not necessarily binding. They're, some people even use the word threats, but the U.S. administration can put in place tariffs as of, August 2nd of the rates that are on there. We do anticipate some more agreements to be potentially executed before that date. There has been a lot of discussion on key agreements with India and other trading partners that the US definitely relies upon. I do think that we are going to get some traction. One of the good things, though, is that if we do get traction and actually have agreements signed, from a multinational perspective, that's what multinationals are looking for. They're looking for some certainty, something to say, I'm really tired of guessing what the rate is. I'm tired of guessing what the rate is on certain products. Can I at least get some certainty so I can look at my supply chain and plan for what this means for me? So my prediction is that we're probably going to have a handful of agreements signed before that date. Then the countries that don't have any trade agreements that have been executed by August 1st, that's going to put a lot of pressure on them, because we might actually deal with a situation of trade arbitrage where we have trade agreements that have been signed for certain countries that have a specific rate, and then these unknown rates that might go into play August 2nd or thereafter. And companies can be looking at this saying, I probably need to go with my more certain supply chain flows versus those that are in the uncertain ones with the letters that don't get, that don't have trade agreements executed.
Chris, we've talked a lot about governments, U.S., other countries, and what they're doing in terms of negotiations. And you just mentioned the company perspective. Could you talk a little more specifically about what companies are doing, what companies should be doing, things that might be a little more granular for them to contemplate?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's really, most of my time is spent talking with companies. I think there's three main points to bring up for that, Scott. One, tariffs are not going away. And I think people realize that now. It's been that way since Trump 1.0. Biden administration didn't get rid of the tariffs. They actually increased them. This administration's doubling down on tariffs. This is something companies have to plan for, and have to plan for not only in the short term, but probably long term. So number two, how do you do that? It's the plan and modeling. And so the modeling right now, it's not looking to say what this potentially impact could be. The modeling now needs to be dynamic. You need to rate affect your sourcing footprint. What I mean by that is, when we have the changes that are going to happen over the next several weeks, call it August 1st, August 2nd, and the months to follow, you need to forecast what that means to your supply chain and operating model and plan for what that impact is, and seeing how do you get a competitive edge in your operating model, given the certainty pieces you do have and the uncertainty pieces you don't have. And the third piece is act. It's not act after, it's acting now. And what we're seeing in the market is a lot of companies over the last several months is saying, we have to do certain things that we know are going to help us because these tariffs are going to be long-term. And they're reevaluating their overall footprint, and they're focusing on the origin analysis, where their products come from, because that's how we tariff in the US. It's based upon country of origin. They're implementing programs that maybe they never had to do before, but other industries like retail always have, like first sale for export, or working from a foreign trade zone perspective and FTZs, but also thinking about what else. How can we unbundle all the different aspects of our transactions and think through where are the different levers that we might be able to adjust from a tariff and non-tariff perspective. So this should not be looked at in a vacuum. From a tariff team, best practice we have is to get a team of representatives across your organization dealing with customs and trade, transfer pricing, tax, supply chain ops, C-suite, to work together to look at the options, because every option that you go through from a tariff mitigation perspective, you have to make sure that it aligns with across the board for all of those groups. Otherwise, if you do something that might be helpful for one, it may be a detriment to another.
Great advice as always, Chris. Thank you very much for your time, and we hope your safety harness on the trade roller coaster is nice and snug.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for our viewers, the latest Week in Review is linked in the description of this episode, as well as links to upcoming webcasts, including one on Tuesday, July 15th, on insights on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Don't forget to register for that webcast, which starts at 2 p.m. Eastern on the 15th.
And I'd like to point out that the Week in Review is with Scott McCandless, and we'll have more coming up on the implications of the One Big Beautiful Bill, including one episode focused on the impact of the new law on the IRS and inevitably you. Thank you so much for spending this time with us, and we hope you have a good week. Take care.